listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you, and welcome to The Briefing. It wasn't a reported assault, complaint or whistleblower that led to accused childcare predator Joshua Dale Brown being charged with more than 70 offences last week. Rather, it was police work that detected evidence of his crimes, and that, according to one of Australia's top child safety experts, is an issue.
Just such a fundamental flaw in the systems that exist in Australia is that all of these people are being picked up by proactive law enforcement investigations. Nothing is being picked up by the systems and processes themselves that exist.
That chat's coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Chris Spiru. It's Tuesday, the 8th of July.
Hey Tara, and to you listening, we're starting in the Victorian town of Morwell, where videos, photos, police interviews and calls from concerned emergency workers are among a long list of evidence being shown to the public for the very first time following Erin Patterson's guilty verdict. Yesterday at the Supreme Court, a jury found Erin Patterson guilty of murdering 3 family members, Don and Gail Patterson and Heather Wilkinson, and attempting to murder a 4th, Ian Wilkinson, after she laced their beef Wellington dishes with death cap mushrooms during a lunch at her Leongatha home in 2023.
During the several week-long trial, the jury heard from over 50 witnesses and reviewed mountains of evidence, including photos from the crime scene, CCTV vision, photos of the beef Wellington meal, and screenshots from family group chats. Some conversations appear to show disputes between Erin and her estranged husband Simon, often relating to their kids, while others showed signs of a deteriorating relationship between Erin and her in-laws in the lead up to the lunch. Now, the jury was also shown toxicology reports and were given a phone call to listen to between an emergency operator and a concerned doctor, Chris Webster, from the hospital Erin and her family members presented to.
I have a concern regarding a patient that presented here earlier but has left the building and is potentially exposed to a fatal toxin from mushroom poisoning. The nurse informed me that she had discharged herself against medical advice. She was only here for 5 minutes.
Following Erin's verdict, a member of the investigating police team, Detective Inspector Dean Thomas, spoke outside court.
I think it's very important that we remember that we've had 3 people. 3 people have died, and we've had a person that nearly died and was seriously injured. I ask that we acknowledge those people and not forget them.
Meanwhile, politicians have also commented on the case, with Nationals leader David Littleproud speaking on the ABC as interest now turns to whether Erin will appeal.
This case has captured the nation's attention for so long. Now, whether she moves forward with an appeal is her judicial right, and you need to respect that.
If Erin tries to appeal, her lawyers would need to prove the jury either did or didn't consider some parts of the evidence they should have or shouldn't have, and therefore the verdict couldn't be justified, or that an error of law was made when the jury was being directed. However, those who attended the trial say the presiding judge was very, very careful and thorough throughout the trial.
Over 100 families are considering suing the childcare giant that employed accused pedophile Joshua Dale Brown. The 26-year-old's charged with over 70 child sex abuse-related offences relating to alleged offending against 8 children at a Melbourne childcare centre in recent years, with police now looking into his other places of work across Victoria.
One parent whose child is one of the 8 that Brown's accused of abusing is suing national childcare provider G8. More than 100 other families are also seeking legal advice, according to The Age. Due to the number of inquiries by the families concerned, a free information night's being held this Thursday evening by the law firm filing the claim.
Yeah, and some of the parents say that they're not getting information and support that they feel they need, while police say they're doing their best to retrace Brown's work history and to try and verify information prior to releasing any information publicly. Brown's currently being remanded in custody and next due to face court in September.
To the US, where the death toll from a flash flood in central Texas has climbed to 91, as search efforts continue for a 4th day amid the danger of more stormy weather. Hundreds of rescuers with the help of sniffer dogs are still working through muddy riverbanks, including those near Camp Mystic, a popular Christian summer camp where around 750 kids were staying when the Guadalupe River broke its banks. At least 27 young girls and staff are among the dead, with dozens still missing.
Yeah, and emergency teams have expanded their search miles downstream after reports that some victims were swept far away but managed to survive. But with more tumultuous weather on the way, hope is fading, Chris, and it comes as locals are pushing for preventative measures like warning sirens to be introduced, something the county's discussed for nearly a decade but never funded. With Donald Trump expected to visit the area later in the week, some residents are hopeful he'll bring a blank cheque to make it happen.
Yeah, and the president has already unlocked federal support to support, recovery and disaster cleanup efforts at the moment. But he is facing questions over cuts to agencies like the National Weather Service and his overall plans to scrap the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, and whether they may have weakened early warnings and the disaster response overall.
Well, FEMA is something we can talk about later. But right now they're busy working, so we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and that's been met with a little bit of criticism as well, because a lot of people are saying, no, now is the time to be looking at root causes, including things like climate change and government responses.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that it is reportedly a season for flash flooding over there at the moment, and this particular area has been dubbed by some outlets in the US as Flash Flood Alley, and that's due to the apparently hilly terrain, tropical heat and moisture that often comes there and brings these really tumultuous conditions that often lead to this kind of flash flooding event. So it'll be interesting to see what Trump does in terms of the funding and whether he'll provide those emergency provisions they're asking for.
Back home now, where millions of households with a mortgage can expect another round of relief when the Reserve Bank meets later today. Fresh off May's 0.25 percentage point rate cut, experts say there's nothing stopping the RBA from doing the same today.
Well, the latest inflation figure for March quarter was 2.4%, so that's well within the target range. So almost everyone expects the RBA to cut interest rates today, probably by 0.25%, and that would mark the first back-to-back interest rate cuts since the pandemic.
That was Mike Starkey from Athena there, and you heard him, the first back-to-back cut since the pandemic, or the first in half a decade, and he says it'll put some handy cash back into some of our pockets.
The average borrower has a mortgage of about $400,000 or $500,000, and as long as your lender passes on the rate cut straight away, and that would mean about $80 to $100 per month savings. And of course, if your mortgage is bigger, then that's more of a saving.
Yeah, and so obviously great news for those owning a home, as we've said before, but on the other side of the park, this does do little to help with our current housing crisis, as it obviously prompts more buyers to go into the already flooded market, Chris.
Yeah, and I mean, look, the intention and hope with lowered mortgage repayments is that in theory it should help boost consumer confidence and spending and, the amount of money of our disposable incomes that we spend on things. Unfortunately, in Australia at the moment, we're not seeing that play out. Retail sales at the moment are weak. They're just 4.5% above pre-pandemic levels, and prices overall are 21% higher than they were half a decade ago. So the leading theory from economists here is that consumers are just scarred by everything that's happened over the last few years, and many Aussies are just keeping that extra cash in their pockets at the moment, saving it for a rainy day, which at this rate is any given day of the week.
And good news for you busy briefers, another supermarket giant in Australia is officially dipping its toe in the delivery pond.
Aldi. Good, different.
Yes, Aldi has partnered with delivery service provider DoorDash so shoppers can buy their groceries online and have them delivered straight to their door. Aldi shoppers would have to use that DoorDash app and search for Aldi like you would any other store, with the supermarket saying its full range of products will be available, and it's all about convenience and meeting consumer demand, Chris, and nothing to do with competition.
The trial will kick off tomorrow. Bad news if you live anywhere but Canberra. It is currently limited to our capital, but it is expected to roll out across the country if successful. And I don't know about you, Tara, but I do think it will be successful. A spokesperson has said there will be price variances, so do expect to see a different price on the app versus in-store, and that's because DoorDash applies delivery and service fees. However, the overarching hope is that, with now more competition in the delivery space, places like Coles and Woolies will bring their prices down, which history has told us, Tara, is highly unlikely. But I don't know, how do you feel about this? Are you a grocery delivery to door gal?
Yes.
You are?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I am. I pay for my convenience. I previously have done this via Woolies. However, I will jump at the first opportunity to ditch them because I just find that the meat and things like that isn't like that great quality. Like you put veggies in the fridge and within a few days they're a bit slimy and yucky sometimes. Whereas whenever I go to Aldi, it's not like that. And I'm always like, come on. I've been waiting for this. So this is great.
And look, no disrespect to my local Woolies. I do love my local Woolies. There's like a few in my area. But the people who pack the carts and fill your shopping trolleys or whatever when you do online orders are like fresh out of school or high school students who
never get what you want.
I never get what I want, and my apples always arrive bruised, and it pisses me off. So
or like rock hard avos.
Yes,
Don't give me a rock hard avo. It takes 3 weeks to soften.
Yeah, but look, here's to hoping Aldi can do it well and do it better. I mean, look, we're going to put the question out to you, our listeners, in our broadcast channel on Instagram. Whether you like this, whether you'll give it a try, let us know. That poll will be up ASAP.
And that brings our headlines to a close for today. Guys, next up is my deep dive with a police officer turned child safety expert who actually helped dismantle one of the world's worst pedophile rings on what he thinks needs to be done to better protect kids from predators. Have a listen to that up next. Depraved, insidious monsters. These are the words used to describe two of the country's worst alleged child sex offenders, accused of horrifying acts against children in Australian early learning centres, and both brought to light in the last year. In 2024, Ashley Paul Griffith was sentenced to life in prison after raping and sexually abusing almost 70 girls in childcare centres in Queensland and Italy over 2 decades. Last week, police charged 26-year-old Joshua Brown with over 70 child sex offences, allegedly committed against 8 children at a Melbourne childcare centre in recent years. The allegations are sickening and disturbing, but they're not new. So why haven't we learnt from previous cases or managed to fix the systems and failings allowing child abuse to flourish? Joining me on the briefing today to help answer that question is Jon Rouse, a child safety expert and former child protection police officer who helped dismantle one of the world's biggest pedophile rings. Jon, there has been many ideas that have been put forward for how we can better protect kids in childcare off the back of these really horrific cases. Some say we need CCTV cameras in every centre. Others have said that we need to literally ban all men altogether from centres. Are either of these solutions or just knee-jerk reactions?
Look, it's to be expected, really, isn't it? In the wake of, there's been previous recommendations and reviews and inquiries on this issue. So looking at CCTV, I would suggest that should be mandatory installation. It would serve as both as a deterrent for potential child sex offenders, but also as a means of evidence collection. So I would definitely be mandating that CCTV should be present. But keep in mind too, technically adept child sex offenders will find ways around that. It was certainly the instance in one of the investigations we're involved in where the offender in question actually put his own SD cards into the CCTV system. And it was downloaded onto his SD card. So nothing is foolproof, but as a frontline defence, having CCTV in place would serve both those purposes. The question of banning men, look, there's also instances where females have offended against children. In conversations with my colleagues that I work very closely with the child line, we have obviously discussed this issue at length. I think what we should be doing is raising the bar consistently across the board for both genders. I don't think banning men, and there are good men who are not offending working in the childcare system. So I think that we should accept the fact that the evidence shows us that there is a higher propensity for males working in this system to commit contact offences against children. The evidence is there for that. These children are very vulnerable, they're non-vocal. So depending on what systems and processes are in place in the childcare centres, they'll take advantage of any flaws or failings that exist. I do not think that we should be banning any gender from working with children, but I just think that we should be making sure that the bar for their employment, their screening and monitoring their daily duties at the centre are of the highest level to protect kids.
And these child abuse cases in childcare, they are not new. We had a really horrific case recently in Queensland, Ashley Paul Griffith. Before that, a case that I believe you were involved in helping dismantle, a pedophile network with a man called Shannon McCool involved. We've seen these cases time and time again over years. What's actually changed and what still needs to?
It's logical, and certainly in my 40 years in law enforcement, most of which was spent in child protection, investigating child sex offenders, they're going to gravitate towards employment that gives them access to children. It's just logical process by the offenders. It's their dream to be working in close proximity to children as part of their work. So Shannon McCool was a childcare worker, and that's how he accessed his victims, and he produced content of those victims to encourage other members of the network to a forum called the Love Zone. He deliberately distributed the content so that other members of the network could be encouraged to do the same thing. You're correct, Ashley Paul Griffith got picked up as part of our COVID operation into the Love Zone where he posted content. So there's a couple of things there that we need to be thinking about. We've mentioned CCTV, but we should also be talking about devices on premises by any employee so that they're not able to capture the content. Another tangent to this that I think you should be really thinking about that shows just such a fundamental flaw in the systems that exist in Australia is that all of these people are being picked up by proactive law enforcement investigations. Nothing is being picked up by the systems and processes themselves that exist.
Wow.
So that's a real problem. But going back to your question, they will gravitate towards employment that provides access to children. You could just do an open source search on, teacher arrested for possession of child abuse material. It happens every year. Through proactive law enforcement work, we're picking up child sex offenders that are working in proximity to kids. If there's going to be a review, it should be looking very closely at the ones that have been picked up, how they were picked up, and that will then help reinforce and identify flaws that exist in the system. So, but the other thing too, I think that is coming to light about some of these offenders is how transient they are and how they move. I think that that's a red flag if you're moving consistently across daycare centres, but there's no national registration system. I think there's a significant gap in the system where we don't have a centralised register for childcare workers. Like a register could track their qualifications, their employment history, any restriction that exists, which would then allow the sharing of concerning histories across the centres to be detected. There's been calls for, lots of calls about the blue card or working with children checks, but note that working with children checks would not have picked these people up because they didn't have criminal histories. But what could be done perhaps to enhance that system is, because it only relies on criminal histories, would be more comprehensive background checks that could include psychological screening, better information and intelligence sharing between agencies, including law enforcement, because you note that Ashley Paul Griffith, there were a number of complaints against him that the Queensland Police investigated, but they didn't reach a standard of evidence that led to a criminal investigation or prosecution. So there's no record of that that's available to anybody in the childcare industry. So, it would be very simple, I would suggest, to have, maybe not simple, it might be expensive, but to implement a national system where if you're going to work with children, we have a national register. I said that the bar should be very high for these people because they're working with the most vulnerable children because they're pre-verbal. So we should have the bar for both genders at the highest possible level, and these checks should be more than just a criminal history. There's people who hold blue cards, as we are aware, that are committing contact offences against children. So a few things there that could be looked at.
Yeah.
The other thing that came up there, I think, out of some of these inquiries has been, the reporting mechanism. So it's pretty clear that childcare staff are hesitant to report suspicions due to fears of, legal and reputational consequences. So perhaps, clearer reporting procedures and protections for the whistleblowers, the people that are coming forward, to encourage really timely and safe reporting of their concerns. And, what we don't have is regulatory oversight of these centres. I know Queensland's allocated funding to hire more compliance officers to monitor the centres. The federal government, I believe, is planning to introduce legislation that would enable it to withhold funding from centres that fail to meet child safety standards. That's a positive, because that would help to enforce compliance through financial accountability. Cultural and structural changes. So childcare centres, from my observations from all of the evidence that we're looking at, they prioritise their reputation over child safety. discouraging staff in some cases from reporting concerns. And that's how these people continue to survive within the system. And, it seems to me that once a flag has been raised, they move. So that would go back to having that national register of who they are, where they've worked, and an intelligence base attached to it that reports or captures any flags that haven't led to the level that law enforcement would get engaged. But, where there's smoke, there's fire. That's always been my experience. So if somebody's coming across your radar 5, 6, 7, 8 times, you have to start questioning. And there's nothing in place at the moment to do that. So I think there's some pretty simple things that can be done at the outset to start addressing this, but it's going to need to be nationally consistent because if, Queensland, for example, puts in all of these fantastic processes, well, where are the child sex offenders that want to work with children going to gravitate to? States or territories that have not put in similar levels of scrutiny for employees.
Jon, what kinds of things do you wish parents knew about this space that they could do differently to try and help protect their kids?
Well, I think that they're getting a very harsh and sad piece of education at the moment, aren't they? It's a really terrible situation we find ourselves in where, because of the current economic climate, both parents are having to work, and they want to have kids. So you've got to put them in some kind of a safe, secure facility. Educating yourself about the fact that this exists is one thing. Start thinking very carefully about the centre that you leave your child at. You should be asked, all of the things that we've just discussed should be on your radar as a parent when you're looking at it or you're shopping around for a daycare centre. What's its policy around 4 eyes on at any given time with the children? That's like two carers at any given time in the presence of children, particularly in the vulnerable situations where they're sleeping or they're having their nappies changed or anything like that. What's their policy and practice in that place? Do they have CCTV? What's their employee screening processes? Those would be, I'll be putting my shopping list down around all of the risks that have been detected to make sure that where you're leaving your child has got everything in place that you need. No device, no camera, no phone, on premises. There's lots I'm sure going through lots of very traumatised people's minds at the moment, but I'd be going back to your daycare centre and starting to ask all of the hard questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And really great advice, Jon. Thank you so much for joining me today on the briefing and for sharing your insights.
Thanks for your time. And there's no guarantee that this will not happen again, but we should be doing everything we can to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
That was Jon Rouse, a former child protection police officer turned child safety expert, on what the country needs to change to better protect kids from predators. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Briefing. That's it for now. If you found this ep interesting, don't forget to leave us a comment or a review, or you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.